The mother lived with her daughter in the woods. I don't remember exactly what the girl's name was, but everyone called her Red because she always played outside with her red cape on, so her mother could easily see where she was. Red lived on the edge of the woods, where the trees slowly gave way to heath and grassland, the safer part of the world. Deep in the woods, it was dangerous. There were not only bears and boars and wolves, but also nymphs and elves with dark eyes and pointed ears that could enchant you in the blink of an eye. In the middle of the woods, in the caves, lived trolls and creatures that only emerged at night to surprise and tear apart lost travelers. One day, Red's mother looked sad.
"What's wrong, Mother?"
She sighed and showed her the letter. "It's Grandma, darling. I think she's so old," she writes, "that the time has come." Red said nothing. She loved her grandmother more than anything in the world. She had a small house deep in the woods by the river, where she had lived her entire life. Every Sunday, Red and her mother visited the old woman, and every time, at the end of the day when the sun would set, she found it terrible to say goodbye and go back home. "We will visit her tomorrow," her mother said. "She asks if we can bring all the necessities. Do you know where the basket is?" But the next day, her mother was ill. She could barely get out of bed and was bathed in sweat. "You have a fever, Mother," Red said. "You look as pale as chalk and shine like a lantern." We must visit her. If we don't go, then..." Red grabbed the basket and threw the cape over her shoulders. "You stay here. I'll go." "No. The woods are too dangerous. Remember what happened to your father? I'll be better tomorrow."
"We have no time to lose. I know the way. If I leave now, I'll be there before dark."
Red's mother thought about her daughter's words. Her face cramped with pain as she pointed to the wall next to the chimney. "Take your father's dagger. Don't be afraid to use it when you have to. Hurry." It was dark in the woods. The canopy was so thick that the sunlight barely had a chance to break through the leaves. It was quiet, as if the trees were holding their breath. The only sound was Red's steps on the cold ground. When she leaped over a fallen tree, someone hidden in the shadows woke up. "Look at that." He had found her, or had she found him? The wolf was so large that his shadow fell over her. His claws were enormous, and his tongue fanned out from his mouth. She was involuntarily reminded of the day etched in her memory, the December day she turned 4, when she went into the forest with her father to chop wood for a birth fire. It was the day the wolf appeared out of nowhere and knocked the axe from her father's hands. Her father reached for his dagger, but the wolf was faster. As the wolf devoured her father, Red ran as fast as she could away from that gruesome place, back home. She cried, she screamed, but above all, she ran and didn't look back. The wolf had howled and called after her. "When you're grown, when you carry much meat, it'll be your turn." She had never encountered him again, but had never forgotten his voice and his grin. And now, there he stood, mouth agape and claw raised. And strangely, she wasn't afraid. For when you witness the most precious thing in your life die before your eyes, all fear leaves you, once and for all. She looked into his eyes and felt nothing but hatred. "And so we meet again. Now, it's your turn, little one." But it seemed Red was prepared for this moment.
"Wait,"
she said.
"Please, I need to... my grandmother. I have to go to her. It's urgent."
The wolf tilted his head. "Your grandmother, you say? Are you on your way to your grandmother's?" She nodded. "What's that you have with you?" Red rested her hand on the basket.
"Treats. Fresh bread, grapes, cheese, honey, wine."
"Disgusting. Where does she live?"
"By the river, next to the hill, beyond the swamp.
The wolf had never been there before. He pondered and had a delightful idea.
You know what? I will let you go. I'm in a good mood today.
Red said nothing.
The forest is dangerous. I will bring you safely to your grandmother. It would be terrible if something happened to you. If you were eaten, right?
The thought of devouring the old woman and the girl almost drove him mad. They set out, Red leading the way. After a while, the wolf squinted his eyes. The trees here were darker and barer, as if autumn had begun. The moss-covered roots were unfamiliar to him. Although strong and cunning, he disliked the unpredictable creatures that hid here, such as the witch and the irritable wood fairies who could turn your head into a beehive. Not to mention the hunter. Without Red, he would surely have gotten lost here. Just as dusk began to settle, he finally saw it in the shadows. A small, secluded cottage with a thatched roof and an old chimney. Smoke curled up from it. The wolf howled with delight. He saw that the door was ajar, and he thundered inside. Then, suddenly, he froze. A strange smell hung in the cottage. He saw a cooking pot simmering on a fire. On the walls hung dried animals, salamanders and frogs and snakes. He saw books with rune signs on the table he couldn't read. Twigs were hung from the support beams, intertwined with rope. His fur began to itch, but he did not know why. The air seemed to get thicker. He felt drowsily. This was not merely the house of an old woman. Then, the door slammed shut. The wolf turned around. He saw Red lock the door and throw the key out of the window.
What are you doing? What is this?
Red grinned. The wolf felt uneasy. It was a grin he recognized. It was the grin he saw in the water when he drank from the brook on a windless day. It was his grin. Then there was a creaking sound. From the shadows shuffled a woman. Her hair hung like gray ropes over her shoulders. The skin on her face looked like discolored paper. She sighed.
Finally.
What is this?
The wolf repeated.
We wanted to thank you,
said Red.
What do you mean?
His heartbeat quickened. Something was entirely wrong in this house, with these people. It was time to eat them.
We wanted to thank you for your sacrifice.
The old woman's voice was as clear as the river that flowed beside the house.
Sacrifice?
He bared his teeth. His voice was low.
I'll show you who here is sacrificed.
And then, something strange happened. He wanted to raise his claw to strike, to knock her gray head from her old body, but his shoulder refused. He felt something wet and warm. And then there was the pain suddenly shooting through his entire body. His eyes widened as he saw a dagger sticking out of his shoulder.
This is for my father!
Red pulled the weapon from his flesh and then planted it in his neck. The blood spurted out. He wanted to roar and scream and tear the both of them apart, but nothing came out of his mouth except a weak groan. He fell on the floor with a thud, but he almost didn't feel it. He felt almost nothing.
Here,
said the witch,
and waste as little as possible.
She handed Red a wooden bowl, and she caught the blood flowing from his neck. As the wolf felt the cold creeping into his paws, he saw the witch take Red's basket. She pulled out 5 crow's feet, a dried red frog, a bat's head, and ground them with a pestle and a mortar. She beckoned to Red.
Now, quickly, the final ingredient.
Red poured the wolf's blood into the mortar. The concoction began to hiss and smoke. With both hands, the old woman held the mortar and drank. When she was done, the wolf, with a blurry gaze, saw her chin smeared with red stains. Then she spoke dark, unknown words, words known only to witches, and her hair began to change color. It turned into dark curls as yellow as corn. Her skin smoothed out. The lines on her face dissolved, and her eyes regained the luster they had when she had been 25. The change lasted only a brief moment, and when it was over, she smiled at Red. She was once again the woman she had been so long ago. It had worked. The wolf had almost gone silent. Vaguely, from somewhere far away, he heard the voice of a young woman.
We need to get rid of his body. If the trolls smell his blood, we'll have visitors soon.
Red looked at her grandmother, who could now be her big sister, and a warm glow, a feeling of intense happiness, overwhelmed her. She inserted the spare key into the lock, opened the door, and pointed outside.
There are heavy stones on the riverbank.
She grabbed her father's dagger from the dead body.
Do you have a needle and thread?